My sister stole my signature pastry recipe, became a local hero, and told me to stop being emotional. 2 weeks later, after her attempts to replicate it failed miserably, she showed up at my door, begging me to save her. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Isn't this just business?" The look on her face was almost worth the years of being treated like I was invisible. Almost. It all started in my tiny, ridiculously small apartment kitchen. That kitchen was my sanctuary. It was where the world made sense. The precise measurements of flour and sugar, the patient alchemy of yeast and warmth, the quiet satisfaction of turning simple ingredients into something beautiful. For me, baking wasn't a hobby. It was how I breathed. Outside that kitchen, I was just Chloe, the quiet younger sister, the one who was still figuring things out. But inside, with flour dusting my cheeks and the scent of vanilla in the air, I was an artist. My family owns a diner. The Corner Spoon. It's one of those places that's been around forever. Frozen in a time when vinyl booths and lukewarm coffee were the height of ambition. My parents bought it from the original owners 30 years ago, and my older sister, Amelia, runs it now. Amelia is everything I'm not. She's pragmatic, sharp-tongued, and wears her ambition like a power suit. She has a business degree and a permanent look of disappointment whenever she looks at me. To her, my passion was a cute but ultimately useless pastime. "When are you going to get a real job, Chloe?" was the constant refrain at Sunday dinners. A real job. As if the 20 hours a week I put in at their diner, baking the same tired, uninspired desserts for next to nothing, wasn't real enough. The diner was failing. You could feel it. The regulars were getting older. The booths were getting more torn, and the menu hadn't changed since the 90s. Amelia would sit at the head of the table, spreadsheets open, talking about profit margins and overhead, her voice tight with stress. I would try to offer ideas. "What if we updated the dessert menu? I have some ideas for laminated pastries, maybe a modern take on a classic coffee cake." She would just wave a dismissive hand. "Chloe, we don't have time for your little projects. We need to cut costs, not add complicated new inventory." My ideas were always little projects. My contributions were always minimized. They let me bake their dry chocolate cake and their bland apple crumble because it was cheaper than buying them frozen from a supplier, but they never once saw it as a skill. I was just the free labor, the family charity case. For years, I swallowed my frustration. I'd smile and nod when my dad praised Amelia for holding the family together, even though her management style was driving away the few remaining staff members. I'd stay quiet when my mom would sigh and say she just wished I would find a nice, stable career like your sister. They saw Amelia's stress as a sign of her importance. They saw my passion as a sign of my immaturity. The injustice of it was a constant low-grade fever in the back of my mind, a simmering pot of resentment that I kept a careful lid on. I kept telling myself that one day they would see me. One day they'd have to. I just needed to create something so undeniably good, so special, that they couldn't ignore it. And then I did. I called it the Morning Bloom. It was my masterpiece. It took me 6 weeks of obsessive, late-night experiments to perfect. It was a delicate, layered pastry, a hybrid of a flaky croissant and a creamy, caramelized custard tart, with a hint of orange blossom and cardamom. The top was brûlée to a perfect crackling shell. When you bit into it, you got the shatter of the sugar, the buttery layers of the pastry, and the warm, fragrant cream all at once. It was complex, beautiful, and utterly unique. It was the best thing I had ever made. I was buzzing with excitement, the kind you only feel when you know you've truly created something new. I brought a box of them to the diner on a Tuesday morning. I set them on the counter, my hands trembling slightly. I wanted you guys to be the first to try something, I said, my voice barely a whisper. My dad took a bite and his eyes widened. Wow, kiddo. That's something else. My mom, who rarely offered praise, nodded slowly. Chloe, this is delicious. But it was Amelia's reaction I was waiting for. She took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and a strange look crossed her face. It wasn't dismissal. It was something I couldn't quite read. Calculation, maybe. It's good, she said, her voice flat. Really good. For a moment, I felt a surge of hope. This was it. This was the moment they would finally see what I was capable of. Amelia took the rest of the box into her office to get a better look. I left the diner that day feeling lighter than I had in years. The next week, I was scrolling through my local town's social media page when I saw it. A post from our town's most popular food blogger. It was a picture of my morning bloom, artfully shot on one of the diner's chipped plates. But it wasn't called the morning bloom. The caption read, "You have to get down to the corner spoon and try the sunrise roll. Amelia has truly outdone herself with this one. A stroke of culinary genius that's going to put our little town on the map." My blood ran cold. Amelia has truly outdone herself. Culinary genius. The word swam in front of my eyes. She had stolen it. She hadn't just taken the recipe. She had taken the credit, the story, my one moment of triumph. I clicked on the diner's page. There it was, a huge banner photo of my pastry. Introducing the Sunrise Roll, a corner spoon original by Amelia. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The simmering pot of resentment didn't just boil over. It exploded. This wasn't a little project. This was my soul on a plate, and she had claimed it as her own. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute. It felt like a physical blow. That was the moment the years of being the quiet, accommodating daughter came to a screeching halt. My first instinct was to scream. To drive down to the diner and cause a scene so loud it would shatter the windows. But then, a strange calm washed over me. What would that accomplish? They would just call me hysterical, emotional. They would twist it to make me the villain, the jealous little sister trying to ruin the family's one chance at success. No, I wasn't going to play their game anymore. I went into my kitchen, my sanctuary, and I started documenting. I pulled out my notebooks, filled with 6 weeks of failed attempts, notes on butter temperatures, hydration levels, and baking times. I photographed every page. I found the pictures on my phone of the very first successful batch, date stamped from 2 weeks prior. I gathered my evidence, not for a court of law, but for a court of my own self-respect. Then I sent Amelia a single text message. I quit. She didn't reply. I knew she wouldn't. She probably felt relieved. One less expense on her spreadsheet. That night, I did something I had been putting off for years. I created an Instagram account. Not Chloe Bakes or anything cute. I just called it Sanctuary Kitchen. I didn't post about the stolen pastry. I didn't post a single word of anger. My first post was a simple, beautiful photo of a braided challah bread, its crust glistening. The caption was just the recipe. My second post was a series of photos showing the painstaking process of making macarons, with tips on how to get the perfect feet. I started sharing everything I knew, all the little secrets and techniques I had hoarded for myself. I was done waiting for someone else to give me a platform. I was going to build my own, brick by brick, recipe by recipe. It was a quiet, methodical rebellion. I wasn't just baking bread. I was taking back my own narrative. And with every post, every kind comment from a stranger, I felt a little piece of myself coming back into focus. The smell of cardamom and burnt sugar will always be tangled up with the memory of my grandmother. Her kitchen was the first sanctuary I ever knew. It was a warm, cluttered room that always smelled of cinnamon and yeast, a stark contrast to the sterile, silent deficiency of my own home. My grandmother, Nana Rose, was the one who put a whisk in my hand when I was 5 years old. She never measured anything. She baked by feel, by scent, by the stories the dough told her. "Listen to it, Clo-Clo," she'd say, her floury hands guiding mine. "It'll tell you what it needs." She saw the magic in it, and she saw the magic in me. With her, I wasn't the quiet one. I was her little baker. I remember one afternoon. I must have been about 10. Amelia, who was in high school and drowning in the teenage misery of being too smart and too unpopular, stomped into the kitchen. I was proudly showing Nana Rose a lopsided batch of snickerdoodles. Amelia sneered. "Are you ever going to do anything besides play with flour? It's so childish." I felt my face flush with shame. But Nana Rose just wiped her hands on her apron, looked Amelia dead in the eye, and said, "Your sister isn't playing, Amelia. She's creating. There's a difference. It takes a lot more heart to create something than it does to criticize it." Amelia had just rolled her eyes and left. But I never forgot that. Nana Rose was the only one who ever defended my dream. When she passed away, she left her collection of handwritten recipe cards to me. They were my most prized possession. To Amelia, she left a small savings bond, a practical inheritance for the practical granddaughter. It was a pattern that had been set in stone my whole life. Amelia was the investment. I was the sentimental afterthought. My parents continued the tradition. When Amelia got into business school, they took out a second mortgage to pay for it without a second thought. When I mentioned wanting to apply to the Culinary Institute of America, my dad patted me on the arm and said, "That's a nice thought, honey, but it's so expensive. Maybe you can take some local classes?" They saw Amelia's ambition as a sure bet, and my passion as a risky gamble. They poured all their resources, all their hopes, into her. The diner was supposed to be her crowning achievement, the proof that their investment had paid off. And I was supposed to stand quietly on the sidelines and applaud. Stealing my recipe wasn't just an isolated act of desperation for Amelia. It was the logical conclusion of a lifetime of being told her needs were more important, her dreams were more valid, and my contributions were, at best, a charming hobby that shouldn't get in the way of real life. She didn't just steal a pastry. She cashed in on 20 years of familial endorsement that placed her on a pedestal and me in the shadows. The Sunrise Roll was an overnight sensation. The food blogger's post went viral in our small-town way. Suddenly, the corner spoon wasn't a dying relic. It was the hottest spot in the county. Cars were lining up down the block before they even opened. People were driving from 2 towns over. Amelia was a local celebrity. The local paper did a feature on her. The business whiz who saved her family's legacy. There was a picture of her, smiling smugly, holding up one of my pastries. She talked about her process of innovation and her passion for blending tradition with modern flavors. I read the article and felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. She didn't even have the decency to look guilty. For 2 weeks, I watched this circus from a distance. I kept posting on my Instagram account, which was slowly, quietly growing. I had a few hundred followers now, mostly other home bakers. They left comments like, "Your instructions are so clear," and "I've never seen anything like this before." It was a small comfort, a tiny island of validation in an ocean of injustice. Meanwhile, I started hearing whispers. A friend who had braved the lines at the diner told me her Sunrise Roll was a little dry. Another mentioned that the second time she went, they were completely sold out by 9 a.m. Then, about 3 weeks after the theft, I got the knock on my door. It was late, almost 10 at night. I looked through the peephole and saw Amelia standing there, shifting her weight from foot to foot. She looked exhausted. Her hair was a mess, and there were dark circles under her eyes. I opened the door, but left the chain on. "What do you want, Amelia?" I asked, my voice devoid of any warmth. She flinched. "Can I come in?" "No." She sighed, a gust of frustrated air. "Look, Chloe, we need to talk." "I don't think we have anything to talk about," I said, my hand tightening on the door. "Don't be like this," she snapped, her old arrogance flaring up. "This is bigger than you and your feelings. The diner is finally successful. This is what we've been working for." "What we've been working for?" I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You mean what you've been working for? Using my work." "Oh, for God's sake," she said, rolling her eyes. "It was a business decision, Chloe. The diner was about to go under. I did what I had to do to save this family. You should be thanking me. We're all going to benefit from this." That was when the knot in my stomach turned to ice. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here to justify, to make me the bad guy for not being a team player. "I'm not making them right," she finally admitted, her voice dropping. "They're not consistent. Sometimes they don't rise. Sometimes the custard splits. I can't keep up with the demand. The blogger is coming back next week for a follow-up piece, and I have people calling to place catering orders." She looked at me then, her eyes pleading. "I need you to show me. Just write down the little tricks. The things that aren't in the notes you left. I need your help, Chloe. For the family." I stared at her, at the sheer unmitigated gall of this woman. She had stolen my creation, my credit, my voice, and was now demanding I help her maintain the lie. She hadn't come to me as a sister. She had come to me as a failing manager, looking for a consultant to fix her production line. I finally understood. To her, I wasn't a person. I was a resource she had failed to properly exploit. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it felt as solid as a steel door slamming shut. "What?" "No, I won't help you. You can't do this," she hissed, her voice rising. "You're going to ruin everything. Dad and Mom are so proud." "They're proud of a lie," I said, my voice finally finding its strength. "You didn't just steal a recipe, Amelia. You knew what it meant to me. And you did it anyway. You stood there and you took the credit, and you smiled for the cameras. That wasn't a business decision. That was cruel." I looked her dead in the eye. "Isn't this just business? Well, from a business perspective, my intellectual property is my own. You are no longer authorized to use it." Her face crumpled, a mixture of shock, fury, and desperation. "You're being so emotional," she whispered. I just shook my head. "No, Amelia. For the first time in my life, I'm being strategic. You wanted to be a business genius? Figure it out yourself." And with that, I closed the door, slid the chain off, and locked the deadbolt. The sound echoed in the silent hallway, a definitive final click. The fallout was both immediate and slow. The diner's brief, brilliant flame began to flicker. The bad online reviews started piling up. "Hit or miss," one said. "Waited an hour for a sunrise roll that was doughy in the middle." Another read, "Overhyped. Not as good as the first time." The local paper's glowing feature was quickly buried under complaints on the community Facebook page. The buzz died down, replaced by a murmur of disappointment. Of course, none of this was Amelia's fault. It was mine. "My mother called me," her voice trembling with manufactured tears. "Chloe, I don't understand how you can be so selfish. Your sister is working herself to the bone for this family, and you're trying to sabotage her." "She stole from me, Mom," I said, the words feeling tired and worn out already. "She's your sister," was the only reply, as if that explained and excused everything. My dad was more direct. He left a voicemail. "Chloe, this has gone on long enough. You're part of this family, and you need to act like it. Stop this foolishness and help your sister. We're all counting on you." They didn't see the theft. They only saw the failure of their investment, and I was the one to blame. The family group chat, which I was already barely a part of, went silent. Then I realized I'd been removed. They were closing ranks, and I was on the outside. But something else was happening too. Something small and hopeful. My little Instagram page, Sanctuary Kitchen, had hit 1,000 followers. Then 2,000. People weren't just liking the photos. They were making the recipes and tagging me. Their kitchens filled with my challah, my macarons, my brown butter scones. They were sharing my posts. A baking supply company reached out and asked if they could send me some products to try. It was a tiny trickle of success, but it was mine. It was real. Then, one afternoon, I got a direct message that made my heart skip a beat. It was from a man named Mark Lanigan. I knew the name. He owned The Daily Grind, a beloved trendy coffee shop in the next town over, the kind of place known for its quality and its community feel. The kind of place I dreamed of working in. His message was short and to the point. "Hi, Chloe. I've been following your page for a few weeks. Your work is exceptional. The techniques you're sharing are professional level. I've been looking for a pastry chef to help me build out my food program. Would you be open to a conversation?" I read the message 5 times. Exceptional. Professional level. Words I had never heard from my own family. I was so used to being the little sister with a hobby that seeing myself through a stranger's eyes felt revolutionary. Here was the diner, the family legacy, crumbling under the weight of a lie. And here was a new door, opening just for me. I felt a surge of terror and excitement. For my entire life, my family had defined my world. Leaving it felt like stepping off a cliff. But for the first time, I had a feeling I might actually be able to fly. I typed back a reply, my fingers shaking slightly. "Hi, Mark. I'd love to have a conversation. When are you free? For so long, I believed that love and validation were the same thing. I thought that if I could just perform well enough, be useful enough, create something brilliant enough, my family would finally grant me the love I craved. I spent years baking for their approval, serving up pieces of my heart on a platter, and hoping they would find it palatable. The theft of the morning bloom was devastating, but it was also a profound, painful gift. It was the final, undeniable piece of evidence that I was chasing a ghost. I was seeking water from a dry well. They weren't capable of giving me what I needed, not because they were evil, but because they had built their entire family dynamic around a single flawed premise. Amelia's success was the family's success. Anything that threatened that, including my own talent, had to be absorbed or erased. Walking away from the diner, from the expectation that I would rescue them from a crisis of their own making, wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of survival. I had to stop setting myself on fire to keep them warm. My worth wasn't something they could grant or withhold based on their needs. It wasn't tied to the fate of the corner spoon. It was in my own two hands, in the knowledge I'd cultivated, in the passion I'd protected against their years of dismissal. The true sanctuary wasn't just my kitchen. It was the space I was beginning to build for myself, a space where my work was valued on its own merits, not for how it could serve someone else's ambition. I was learning that family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the community you build, the people who see your light and don't try to dim it for their own benefit. The moment I sent that message to Mark, I wasn't just replying to a job offer. I was choosing a different future. I was finally choosing myself. My conversation with Mark was like stepping into a different reality. I met him at the Daily Grind, and instead of asking me what I could do for him, he asked me about my process. He wanted to know what inspired me, what flavors I was excited about, what my dream pastry case would look like. He didn't see me as a pair of hands to execute a task. He saw me as a creative partner. He had tasted a sunrise roll during its first week, and he'd also seen my Instagram. "I knew it was yours," he said with a simple shrug. "You can't fake passion. Her version tasted like a formula. Yours, well, I could tell someone loved making it." I started working with him part-time, developing a new pastry menu for the Daily Grind. He gave me complete creative freedom. I brought back the morning bloom under its rightful name. We sold out in an hour on the first day. Then I introduced other creations, a savory Danish with goat cheese and caramelized onions, a lavender-infused shortbread, a dark chocolate rye cookie that was dense and complex. People loved it. The cafe thrived, and I was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. My family, of course, saw this not as my success, but as a direct attack. My mom stopped speaking to me entirely. My dad left another voicemail, his voice thick with disappointment. I heard you're working for that competitor now. After everything we did for you, Chloe, your grandmother would be so ashamed. That was the line that finally broke the last thread of obligation I felt. Ashamed? Nana Rose would have been the one handing me an apron and celebrating my success. They were twisting her memory to manipulate me, and it was the ugliest thing they had done yet. The Corner Spoon closed its doors 6 months later. They couldn't recover. The initial hype was gone, and their regular business had already dwindled. Amelia, according to the town grapevine, blamed everyone but herself. The economy, the fickle customers, and most of all, me, the ungrateful sister who refused to help. The story could end there, with me thriving, and them failing. A neat little tale of karmic justice. But life is messier than that. About a year after the diner closed, I got a letter in the mail. It was my mother's handwriting. Inside was not a letter, but a single, yellowed recipe card. It was for Nana Rose's snickerdoodles. The one I had been making the day Amelia called my dreams childish. There was no note, no explanation, just the card. I didn't know what it was supposed to mean. An apology, a peace offering, a reminder of a time when we were a family. I put the card in a drawer and didn't reply. A week later, another envelope. This time from my dad. It was a faded photograph of me at about 7 years old, covered in mud, proudly holding up a lopsided mud pie in our backyard. On the back, he had written, "You were always a baker." I stared at the photo, at the note, and I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt a profound sense of pity. They were reaching for a connection they themselves had severed. They were trying to rewrite history, to remind me of a simpler time, where my role was clear and non-threatening. But they still weren't talking about the present. They weren't acknowledging the harm. They were sending relics from a past they had abandoned, hoping it would be enough to build a bridge back to the daughter they had lost. But they didn't seem to understand that I wasn't that little girl anymore. I wasn't waiting for their permission to be proud of what I could create. The bridge was gone, and they were the ones who had set it on fire. What do you do when the people who are supposed to be your biggest supporters become the architects of your deepest pain? Do you keep showing up, hoping they'll change? Or do you walk away and save yourself? For anyone out there who has ever been made to feel small, whose passion has been dismissed as a silly hobby, whose voice has been silenced, I see you. Your worth is not negotiable. Your talent is not for others to claim. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to close a door, not out of hate, but out of a fierce and unwavering love for the person you are becoming. Have you ever had to make a choice like that? Let me know in the comments below. Your stories matter. Thank you for listening.